Hey there, and welcome to the Dynamics Hot Dish Podcast, serving up stories and knowledge on Dynamics 365 and the Power Platform. This is What's Hot in Dynamics. You're now joining Merlin Schweiger, Liz McGlennon, and Ashley Steiner.
I've only watched all the Love is Blind episodes.
I only watched the first one.
Oh man. It's high quality television.
Oh yeah, totally.
I don't watch a lot of reality TV. So like I watched the first season because we were in lockdown, weren't we? Or like it was
I feel like it was right at the beginning.
It was in that time period of like COVID and you couldn't go anywhere. So I did watch the first season, but then I just don't like reality TV. So
I mean, if you don't like reality TV that much, like Love is Blind is good, but it's not as good as Fboy Island. Just saying.
Is that also on Netflix?
No, it's actually on HBO.
Oh, okay. So HBO Max, you could watch it probably?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Why is that one better?
Because it's so much more ridiculous. Like, I feel like Love is Blind is really interesting because it's like an interesting study in like how people like get to know each other and then like
but I also think
attraction
they're normal. Like the people on Love is Blind, like
they are
most of them
normal,
are very normal personalities. Like
right.
They're not, well, at least the first season, right? Like
and same with the second season. Like there's a lot of people in Love is Blind where I'm like, okay, like yes, I know somebody like that person. I know somebody like that person. Like I'm kind of like that person. Like you can, you're right. They're kind of more normal people.
Like Shane is crazy though.
Oh, Shane is crazy, but I feel like I've met. Yeah, but I feel like I've met people in my life that are like Shane in real life.
But you always have to have like that one crazy person, right? To keep it like interesting.
Yeah. I thought
so if you think of like Jersey Shore, I know nobody that is like the people that are on Jersey Shore. And I'm guessing that's how Fboy Island.
I don't think those are real people on Jersey Shore. I know they're real people, but I don't believe it's real people.
But like
so
Fboy Island is probably like that, right? Where
so it is
personalities.
Yes, it's so ridiculous. And the host is Nikki Glazer. She's a like stand-up comedian and also like hosts this show. She's really funny.
I know, yeah.
So like the whole premise of the show basically is like tongue in cheek. It's like this is a ridiculous thing. And so you've got like these 3 women and these 20 men, and the women are trying to decide amongst the men. But like the thing is that like half of the men are self-proclaimed nice guys and half of the men are self-proclaimed F-boys. And, you know, they're just there to like win. And the nice guys are there for a relationship. And then there's some whole thing like, I don't know, there's $100,000 that like somebody can win at the end, but it's kind of like vague as to like how you can win the $100,000. So like, it is ridiculous.
So the men are trying to deceive the women and get the woman to choose them, but they're really just in it for the money.
I love
the half
Liz's
of the men
perspective on this.
Yes. Half of the men are exactly trying to play the women, and the other half of the men ostensibly
that's like real life then.
Not trying to play the women, and the women have to figure out which one's which. And the cool thing about Fboy Island is that it's not just like, I feel like I haven't watched that many other like dating shows,
like
you know, like Bachelor or whatever, but like as I understand it, in most of those shows, like the women are like fighting with each other because, you know, they want to like get the best men or whatever, and so they're like trying to outdo each other. Fboy Island, like the 3 women are like, they're tight. They're like the 3 of us versus all of these men, and it's like a totally different sort of vibe. It's a totally different vibe.
Interesting.
Huh.
So Liz, I think our homework is to watch Fboy Island.
I don't have HBO Max anymore.
I can give you my password.
It is ridiculous.
I'll give you my
password. I want you to know it is ridiculous. And in the first episode, you're going to be like, I hate all of these people. But if you make it past that first episode, you're going to be like, okay, actually, I don't hate all of these people. These women are actually kind of funny. And some of these men are okay. And some of them like, oh my God, how would anyone fall for that? And yet it seems like they are.
They do.
It's amazing.
So is this an American show? Because I do know that there's like some shows like this that are super scandalous that are like made in the UK and stuff. So I didn't know if it was.
It's an American show.
What makes it super scandalous?
Well, they have different rules of what you can put on TV
Okay.
in Europe than in America.
Okay.
Right.
And so you can cuss on TV. They don't do the bleeps. They can have.
Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, this is on HBO, but there's no nudity that I
Right.
recall.
And so nudity you can have in Europe. And like just
Interesting.
again, like the same big personalities, like they find those people, and I mean those people are everywhere. It's not like America is the only one with obnoxious people.
They make for good TV. Like I still have like passionate feelings about some of the men on Fboy Island, and like some of the women be like, I don't know, like I feel like maybe he's really into me. And I'm just like, why would you think that?
Because women are stupid and they like to see all past all the faults of men.
Well,
Love truly is blind. To go back.
full circle. Well, so that's my TV recommendation.
Okay. I'll watch it this weekend while I'm working.
Nice. Should we talk about our actual subject then?
Yeah, sure.
Sure.
Data imports and migrations, right?
Yeah, right. I'm gonna make you kick us off because you're the one who said you just did one. So I feel like
So
the
like
most recent wins.
yeah, so we're talking about like just the out of the box import, right? Being able to is that
Well,
not
all of it. I mean,
Yeah,
that's
'cause, like-
that's an option, but I think we need to talk about the options.
Yeah, so I mean, I've gone through a migration recently using data flows. I know that we talked about that on the data flows episode. So if you haven't checked that one out, I go into a lot more detail. But the difference now is that migration is done. I think we were like halfway through when we recorded that episode. So, and then also just data imports is like something I do as an admin of our system. It's something I do all the time, and it's probably one of the most painful parts of working on the system. It really is. Like it's not. So I mean, like the most recent one is, they had a list of we're onboarding a new company onto our system, and they had all of their opportunities in a spreadsheet, not in their previous CRM system. So they said, hey, can you import these? But they've already been using the system now for like 2 months. And I said, cool, is this going to create duplicates? And they're like, maybe, but we'll take care of that like after the fact. Like we would rather get everything in and then delete. Well, nobody communicated this to the end users. So because anyways, and so they freaked out because they're like, all my stuff is duplicated. And
all of it was not
all of it. No, there were just a few, but the people that were actually using the system and putting in their opportunities are the ones who are the most vocal.
And then they suffered the most from it.
And then they suffered the most, and nobody told them, hey, we're going to be doing this import. And yeah, so it was pretty painful.
Yeah.
It's kind of too bad.
I would be annoyed if I were them too and no one told me.
So, well, that, and then just as like the person doing the import, like I find it painful. Like right now we have another list of just accounts, like for somebody who like is moved into an enterprise sales role. So they were not on Dynamics before, and now they are because their role changed. And we have to like one by one look up every single account because we can't just import it. Because what if the account names are different?
I suppose. Well, you can key off of other things. It doesn't have to be the name. I don't know if there's any other consistent.
I don't
data
think
that you
they
can key
have
off of.
good enough data to do that, Marla. Remember from
I
other
know.
episodes?
Yeah, no,
Comes
our
back
data
around to
quality is very poor.
Yeah, that's true.
And so, so it's like a list of 300 accounts that we have to like manually search for in Dynamics, mark whether it's already in there. Is it already assigned to another person? Do we need to create it?
That's gross.
It's painful. And I used to not care as much and just like run it against our UAT environment and be like, all right, these are the only ones I can import. Like, here's a list of the ones I can't. But our UAT environment is so old at this point that it wouldn't even give an accurate. And I don't want to copy our production to UAT, which I know is what Merlin's going to say next. Like, oh, just do a copy, because that would put us way over our data, because I would have to like delete all of the activities and things like that because of how large, our production environment is ginormous. So
that stuff.
Yeah. So those are my most recent experiences.
Yeah. I feel like the out of the box data import tool is fine, but I don't love it. I've never loved it. I've always avoided it whenever possible because I feel like it's too limiting. right? Like
it's good for specific use cases. It's
Like,
I don't know,
see-
it's easier, it's like easier to learn than the other options, I think too. Like it's less of a learning curve. And so if you have something really simple you're trying to do, like it works.
Like the opportunities is a great example if they were not already using the system, right?
right.
So let's say you have a person who only tracks their opportunities in Excel spreadsheet because that's what they've always done. They have nothing in Dynamics, super easy thing to import. You know,
Okay.
just making sure the account names are the same, or like you said, Merlin, like match on another data point, like if there's customer numbers or things like that. That's actually pretty simple to do. It's like we used to use Scribe. I know that Scribe's not really a thing anymore. Or
Tibco.
now it's Tibco, and
Yeah.
I don't know what their place is in the market. But I know that I've worked with companies that use Scribe, and then you could like check, you know, fuzzy matches, other data points, and skip over things if it was already in there, or reassign it if it wasn't assigned, things like that.
Right.
So I mean, what
You
other
could-
options?
You
do
could
you
take
guys-
more kind of logical steps there.
But somebody would have to build it.
Right.
Right.
That's the thing.
So I mean, for me, like my deal breaker for using the import, two things. It's either like the import wizard, you can't do activities. Like if you need to import activities or notes, like you absolutely cannot do that with that. And then it's just the volume of data. So like it's been a while since I've done it, but I kind of feel like if you have like 10 or 15,000 rows, like that's when the import wizard kind of starts like having performance issues. And so like those are the two things I always kind of look for. Like if we want to try to use the import wizard, you know, those are the first two questions I kind of ask or get answered.
When are you
Right.
importing 15,000 records?
If it's a new implementation, a lot
I
of
see.
places,
Okay.
you know, would have that many accounts or contacts or leads or opportunities.
Especially
like if they're
just under
coming off
Excel,
another
probably.
system. Yeah, or
Yeah.
coming out of it. Like I've like taken people off like a legacy CRM product, and like they export everything to Excel and then they want to import it using the import wizard.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Because they don't want to pay
That's
money
painful.
for a separate tool.
Right. Or there's no one that has the skill set for the separate tool.
Right.
Either one or both.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. I've just never run into that kind of situation, I guess, because I've always worked on existing
Yeah.
environments.
And I have even set up the product catalog with the import wizard, which is not super fun, but it is possible. It's just you got to do everything in the right order.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
That sounds awful. I'm so sorry.
But it is possible.
I feel like setting up the product catalog by hand is a pain in the butt. I don't think I'd even want to try to do it with the import wizard.
But if you have like thousands, what do you mean by hand? Like if you have thousands of rows, you're not going to key that in individually. I mean, I just don't like the product catalog in general. It's really difficult. So
sure, topic for a different day
yes.
there. Yeah, the import wizard, I feel like it was built by somebody who was like, oh, you're going to go to a trade show and get a spreadsheet with leads in it, and you want to import those leads, and you got an admin who's going to import those leads, and that's what the import wizard is for.
Mhm.
And beyond that, yeah, it's a real pain in the butt. Building relationships is tricky. You can't import anything that's inactive or in a closed state, which is why it doesn't work at all for activities, because of course this phone call was completed. Well, sorry, can't do that. I think using data flows now gives you a lot more capability with something that's out of the box where you don't have to buy a separate tool.
But
But I
again,
know,
the
like,
experience level,
do need to have, yes,
a more technical
a more
Like
technical
would
person.
Ashley and I be able to figure that out?
over time, maybe, but
I mean,
Not our first
sure,
time.
you would,
it's
but
like
you're not just
I
gonna
think
like,
it'd be like Power Automate, right? Where like,
It's
sure,
very
over time you
similar.
could learn it, but
But actually, don't you remember struggling with the import wizard like back in the day too? Like your first one, like I'm pretty sure I made a lot of mistakes in the beginning. So I feel like there was a learning curve for that too, and we just got used to it. And we've been doing
yeah,
this
but
long.
I feel like my mistakes were much more simple though, like where you didn't check to make sure there's blank rows at the end, and it created all these like blank records, or like you didn't know there was a column and then you could, you know what I mean? So like it's not like having to learn coding to create a data flow,
You don't have
code,
to
low code, whatever.
you don't have to code.
Well, they say you don't have to do that in Power Automate either, and I don't believe you that in Merlin.
Well, no. So Power Automate, you have to write something. You have to understand some scripting things really to do anything with like dynamics. You got to know OData and you got to know all these things because there's a lot of like little finicky bits to make it work. Data flows aren't that complicated. They're not as complicated as Power Automate by itself. It's more like it's more, I mean, it relies on Power Query. So if you've used Power Query and Power BI, like if you've connected to a spreadsheet and like built a basic report off the spreadsheet, maybe, I guess Ashley's never done that, but Liz is nodding, like maybe she's done it once or twice.
Yeah.
So like Power Query is actually relatively easy to use. It's like you connect to your data source and then it's like, okay, here's your data. And then you're like, all right, I want to transform this column. I want to like fix this. I want to do whatever. And it's like, okay. And you just like do all these steps and it's all like relatively easy.
It's pretty easy.
It's your data set.
Yeah.
Okay.
It is.
It's kind of like Excel, like Excel
Yeah.
on steroids. But like if you're comfortable in Excel, you can figure out Power Query.
Okay.
Yeah. And so then Power Query brings the data in, and then the data flow part is just like, well, now where do I put it? And there's some like, to do lookups, you have to have keys defined on the tables in Dataverse. So you actually have to go and like create a user key. Otherwise you can't connect to that table or do a lookup, but you can key off of anything, any field that you want, but you can only have one, which is kind of a limit. So it's like, you can build relationships more easily. But what I found doing data, like moving data with data flows, is like, you're still like doing stuff in waves. Like, okay, first I'm going to bring in all of my accounts, and then I'm going to bring in all my contacts and parent them to the account. And then I have to run accounts again, but with the primary contact field filled in, so that now that gets filled in. And so you got to like kind of roll through stuff. And this may not be best practice. Someone might leave a comment and be like, well, you shouldn't do it that way. But like, I would actually just end up going back to the first data flow, like the accounts one, and be like, okay, now I'm running it and I'm mapping this field and I'm not mapping that field. Just run it again, because it also will update records that are already there and then add new ones that weren't there, which is a handy feature that you can't do with the import wizard.
Right.
So then I'd go back and like change it, which probably isn't the best practices. Then when it gets time to like do this in production, it's like, okay, so run this one and then go back and like change the mappings or run it a second time because this stuff didn't work. And
yeah. So I mean, the import wizard hasn't been updated like ever. So it seems like data flows are the future, like the future version of that.
Probably. I mean, that's the assumption I would make, I guess, is, you know, since there haven't been changes. And so my question on data flows, though, is that does it work with every table? Because we ran into problems with opportunities in data flows, like bringing opportunities in.
I mean,
or do you think it was just a limitation at the time? Or
it works with every table, but big asterisk, it also depends on like what you're trying to bring in or like how that data is related to other data. Like, so you can build relationships, like you can fill in lookups with key, but you only have one. And you can like, it doesn't do a super great job with stuff that like it didn't work.
You're gonna have to
like,
rephrase that some other way, Marilyn, because
I'm
I'm
not
not sure I followed.
Yeah, you're right. Sorry. So it doesn't
It's pretty
do that
vague. When there's
with,
problems, there's problems.
Anyway.
Try again, Marilyn.
If a row fails to import, it will tell you why it failed to import. But there's no real effective way to just say, okay, just try the ones that failed again.
Like, so
just
like
try the
import
failure
wizard
ones
in
again.
that way.
Right. You have to like run the whole thing. Now, like I said, if it already brought in 80 of your 100 rows, it's just going to like look at those and be like, oh, nothing changed here and move on. And then just bring in the 20, assuming that you fixed the 20. But especially if you're dealing with relationships, like I ran into this problem with owners. Like I'm trying to map everybody to an owner, but not all of the old owners are in the new system, right? So like,
no problem.
So you like, I ended up doing this again. It's like a two-phase thing. Like, well, okay, so first I'll bring in all the opportunities and I won't map the owner because I want all of the opportunities to come in. And then I'll run it again, but I'll map the owner field, knowing that any owners that don't exist, those will fail on the second run. And so the first owner, which is the sysadmin me, will still own those records and it'll reassign all of the ones later. But like what I found with some other kinds of data, it depends on the kind of data, is like sometimes after you bring it in with the data flow, then you got to trigger a flow in Power Automate to like fix things, change things, add more complicated relationships, like do other stuff. So it's like the data flow would carry me to this far, but to get to the last mile, I still had to like, okay, like now that I've got this data, I need to like fix it with a flow, or I still need to pull more out of the source with a flow because the data flow just.
But like that owner example, that's going to be a problem no matter what tool you're using, because that user just simply doesn't exist. So like that's not a limitation of data flows. Like you would have that problem with Kingswaysoft or Scribe or anything else as well, right?
In Scribe, I could just say, assign it if I have it and leave it as me if I don't. And like I build that logic into the process and it just does it all.
Sure.
Like that's where
it's all in one step instead of multiple.
That's where
runs.
The real tool helps you out a lot, like a real data migration tool, whether it's Kingswaysoft and SSIS or the Tibco Scribe product, whatever it happens to be now, or something else that's out there. Like all of those tools ought to give you the ability to like make decisions, like look up data in advance, like, okay, go find this account and find this record and find that record. Now that I've got all that, like put all those things into this that I create and like then build these relationships. And you do all of that in like the single process. So you just like click the button and the whole thing runs.
Right. Do you think the data flows will get there? Do you think that their intention is to make it that kind of migration tool?
Maybe. I've actually wondered about that because it's a good step up from the import wizard, which is fine. Terrible. Very basic. Very basic.
Merlin and I have very different perspectives apparently on the
it's
out of the box import tool.
It's very basic. And data flows is a lot better, but it still is not, it's not a migration or integration like full tool set yet.
Can data flows, sorry, Ashley, can data flows import like records with a non-open status, like closed opportunities, closed leads, completed activities?
No, that's where the flow would have to come in after the fact.
The Power Automate flow. Okay. That's too bad.
So like that was a like, and you could set that up to like run as the data flow is running. Like when a new record is created, if this field that I created for status says this, then actually set it to inactive. Or you like run it all at the end, like run through all of my opportunities.
Seems like a lot of setup work though.
Well, and it's like you have to like do it like Merlin said in order. So when we went live, like, okay, this is done now, this is done now, we have to go, you know what I mean? Like all weekend we were basically just following the steps. And then like there were steps that I had to take like in the middle, right? Like certain things had to like get assigned, like to Merlin's point, like, oh, if the user or if the owner was still this, I took a different, you know what I mean? So there were just like an order that things had to be done in.
Yeah, you have to be really hands-on and attentive. Right. It's not like
it wasn't just like
run
hit
for
the
weekend and then check on
like you couldn't Scribe. Right. Like the other data migrations I've done were with Scribe, and you could hit a button and maybe check on it. Or
I was gonna say you still wanted to check on it because if something like exploded, like you still need to fix it.
But it wasn't as hands-on. It wasn't like you had to like take a step and then another step.
It's actually just check on it.
The other thing that I noticed with our data flow, and again, like it's hard to know what was maybe just error, like human error versus the data flow, but we could not get the dates to match. So like, we brought over like activities and we brought over like the due date. And for whatever reason, whatever due date was in the system we were bringing the data from, we could not get it to match.
Is that just a time zone conversion issue?
I don't know, but like some were fine and others were not. And like, for whatever reason, we could not, it was the weirdest thing.
So it was probably like on the cusp of like the time where
it was like weeks off. We're not talking like, it wasn't
weird. Like a day off.
No, because if it was a day off, I would have been like,
it's time
cool.
Zone.
Like it's time zone. Like, sorry, you're just gonna have to deal with it.
Right.
But yeah, it was, and that's where I wonder, Merlin, is going back to your like, oh, you have to run something several times. And like, if it hasn't changed, it'll skip it. Like, I just wonder if like, as you run things multiple times, like it just, I don't know, like the more you touch something, the more room you have for error and issues. And so that was where with data flows, I was like, okay, now we're just touching the data too much. Because then we kept trying to go back in and fix it. But then if they had made changes, it would overwrite those changes.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was like, okay, now we just got to stop. Like, so sorry, salespeople, you've got to manually edit these 800 phone calls. But like at some point you've just touched it way too often.
Right.
Yeah, you have to.
Yep. And Dataflows does not have anything like a real migration tool where you could be like, well, check the modified on date first. And if the modified on date is more recent than this date, then skip it. Just move on.
Because you said there's no like logic or something you can put in there. I don't know what word you use, but.
No, I mean, unless you can figure it out in the transformation just on the data source. But like, you can't compare source data with target data and then make a decision based on that. It won't do it.
Interesting. So I feel like before we move on to the other tools, like the intent, I feel like the intent with the import wizard was to always enable end users to be able to import data, but I feel like that's also just kind of a ridiculous idea in general. Like, is that still the intent with data flows, or like, do we feel like it's moving in a direction where you have to have a slightly more advanced skill set or like permission set to actually import data? Because I feel like that was, again, like kind of the reason for the import wizard, but like actual end users really struggled with getting it to work or actually using it in that way.
Well, probably because if you're trying to do anything beyond the most basic of basic, it doesn't handle it very well. So then you got to do a bunch of workarounds. I think I would expect
I also
that Microsoft
just insert here that I've never let end users import their own data. I didn't know that was
I've been at companies that do.
I would never.
Yeah.
I don't trust people.
Not like, okay, let me clarify. Not the full set of end users, but like a subset of end users that are like super user, power users, or in admin roles where they're getting spreadsheets and they do, it's kind of like you said, a data map up for them and then they can just reuse it. But even that is kind of a struggle.
Yeah, I can't even imagine.
Well, and I think by like it's so easy to get to in the system too. Like I do really feel like that was the intent behind that tool.
I agree. I think that was the intention, is like your sales admin can import the leads from the trade show you just got back from. Like that's what it was there for. It'll probably stay just for that sort of use case, whether or not people use it. Data flows is not going to be the same thing. Like you gotta go into the maker portal and you gotta like build them there. You have to know Power Query, which is both not complicated and also somewhat complicated. I think that my understanding of the intention behind data flows is to streamline bringing all of your data that you might want into Dataverse from other various systems on like a recurring basis, like as kind of a simple, I don't want to really call it a data integration because it's only going to be one way, like from the other system into Dataverse. But like, I want to pull my order history in from my ERP system on a weekly basis. I don't want to have to buy an integration tool. I don't have, Azure Service Bus or whatever. I just want to pull order data in on a weekly basis. I can use a data flow. Once I get it all set up, then like every week it just runs and it pulls in my order data, and it's easy and simple to get data into Dataverse.
Sure.
I think as an extension of that, like we've tried to expand the usage to then be like, well, it's an out of the box tool. We could do it for like a normal data migration, like somebody's coming off of a system, like we can migrate our data that way.
But that's not what the intention was. So it's not quite built for that yet.
Right. Okay. And so that's why you end up with all the workarounds and the extra flows to like fix stuff and whatever. But like, if it was just a simple, like, I want to pull data in on a regular basis, that's what data flows is built for.
Okay.
So I don't know, maybe they'll add more to it over time and it'll get cooler and better and be able to do more stuff. Or maybe the ISV community, like Tibco, will call out Microsoft and be like, stay off my turf. That's my turf.
Should we talk about the other tools then?
Yeah, I think it's a good idea. And my only experience was Scribe, right? And I personally was not the one doing the configuration, right? I always worked with a contractor or more of a development type resource, but helped with like the decisions, right? So when this happens, you do this. And I just always found it, and I guess I always found it easier because I wasn't the one doing the actual setup, but like the outcome of it was just more tailored to what I as an admin would want out of an import tool.
It's a more robust tool.
Right.
Yeah.
But with
Yes.
that comes complication and needing to know more technical type, I would say, at least. I do know that they
Yep.
had this like light scribe option for a while where like it was just basically like, okay, here's the data points of your spreadsheet. Here are the, you know, the columns or columns are at the time fields of CRM, and you could map it and then you could just like make decision. It was like a much lighter version. I don't know if that, now that
Is that
they're
the
bought
online
by-
one?
Maybe there was a name for it, like Scribe on the Go or something, like I don't know, but you know what I'm saying.
I don't
Like,
think that was
It
the name.
it was not it, but you know what I'm saying. Like it had a cute little name and whatever, but I don't know if that's even still an option now that they've been bought by Tibco. Again, that was also like 7 years ago, so I'm really
Yeah.
dating myself on that.
That was Scribe Online, and they built a whole
I like my name
interface
better,
where you
by
could
the
like.
way.
I'm
They can
sure
pay
you
me for
could,
that later.
if they were still using the Scribe brand, I'm sure that they would. But they'd like built a whole like online UI with like puzzle pieces where like everything was shaped a little bit differently, so you knew like which thing went where, and it was a slightly easier method of building an integration. It worked okay.
I never
Um,
actually used it, but like saw demos, and because I was like, okay, I could do that. Like is what you know the sense. And then we decided to go a different direction or made it more complicated or something. So
Yeah. I mean, we want to get reminiscent about Scribe. I have a soft spot in my heart for Scribe. I have done a lot of data migration and integration work with the Scribe workbench. I really miss having that tool, honestly. Like I really liked that. I really liked it. It
I feel
let
like
me
Merlin's
do
about to start crying.
I know.
so
Like
many
this is like an
things.
It's
epilogue.
nostalgia.
Yeah.
It is nostalgia. No,
I was,
like
yeah.
you could do anything you needed to do, anything. And like, yeah, you could, sometimes you had to do some like weird little scripty things, but like it was so logical. You like break out all these different steps, and like, Ashley, let me tell you, I built some crazy integration jobs. Like I had one that had like 25 different steps because I had to look up all these different things and build all these relationships, and it worked, and it was awesome.
Okay, so here's a dumb question, because I just haven't been in the market for a migration tool. Because again, we pay a vendor and they do it for us. So does the Scribe tool not exist under the Tibco brand anymore? Or do they keep that tool just like Tibco on the go? See what I did there?
I see what you did there. It's
Yes.
nice. I will be honest, I don't know. Because people stopped buying it after Tibco acquired Scribe because the prices like doubled, and then nobody wanted to use it anymore.
Yikes. And it was already expensive.
It was already pretty
Scribe
expensive.
was already pretty expensive. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Compared to
So-
Kingswaysoft is free if you host it yourself, right?
It's not free.
Only for
but
a
it's-
one time.
One time. Okay.
Yeah, if you have an ongoing
But-
integration, you have to pay for it.
But if
Yeah,
you do
but
a
you pay,
one-time
like-
migration, it's
you pay like
and you host
$2,000.
it yourself.
Yeah.
Like, even if you buy
Which
it,
is
it
so
was like
cheap.
it was like $2,500 for a perpetual forever license. Like
So
It's
cheap.
so much cheaper.
So
than
cheap.
Is it still
Scribe.
that cheap though?
it is still that cheap. Keep in mind
Okay.
though, you do have to run it on a SQL server. So you have to have a SQL server
host
because
it.
it's
But
not a
there
standalone
is-
tool.
Well,
It
there is
just
an
plugs
online.
into SSIS.
I thought there was a cloud version that was more expensive for Kingswaysoft. Am I wrong?
I think they have a way that you can run it in like an Azure SQL server
I
also.
see. Okay, but it still has to be a SQL server.
But you do
Okay.
like you have the added cost of the SQL server.
Right. And then the maintenance, and you have to have
right.
somebody that,
But
yeah.
if you've already got a SQL server sitting around,
Which a lot
Then-
of companies
which a
do.
lot of companies
Right.
still do, then Kingswaysoft is like, it's a no-brainer. You just
Mhm.
it's peanuts basically, and now you've got basically all the same capabilities that you had in Scribe. You just have to build it out in SSIS.
I've never personally worked with Kingswaysoft, like hands-on. I've only done Scribe, but I've seen demos of Kingswaysoft and trainings, and like it looked easier to me than Scribe too.
But it's also it's only,
I was gonna laugh if Marlon was like, but it's also harder.
no, but it's only 70% of the process. Like using the Kingswaysoft Adapter stuff probably is easier than using like Scribe Workbench, which could be a little bit complicated. But the Scribe Workbench was taking it like start to finish. Kingswaysoft is just handling your connection with Dynamics. It's not doing all of the other logic around like maybe retrieving data from some other source that isn't going through Kingswaysoft, or like error handling or decision making, or like all that other stuff is happening in SSIS, which is also a fully featured integration tool, which I discovered last year. I don't actually know as well as I thought that I did, and it is harder to learn than I thought that it was. It's not
So Ashley, you and I are definitely not going down that path. But
no, I mean, so it does sound like maybe Dataflows is like the best forward, right? Because you can connect it to a different source. You can
it's a great
bring
happy
it into
medium.
Dynamics. Yeah. Because Kingswaysoft, I mean, there's no way I could know anything about SSIS. I mean, there's no way. Like I already know my limitations and
right. But if you've got a DBA, then it's easy. And then you say to the DBA, you already do SSIS, build me a process that talks to this. Oh, and by the way, to talk to Dynamics, here's this Kingswaysoft adapter. Just use that.
But you could just use SSIS to connect to Dynamics, couldn't you? So what's the point of Kingswaysoft?
Yes. Kingswaysoft facilitates the communication. That's it. It is a good question. You can, and in fact, historically, people would use SSIS to talk directly to Dynamics, directly to the web services. SSIS has the capability to speak to a web service, but then you got to write all of that. You got to write a bunch of code and logic to be like, here's the endpoint, here's how to authenticate, here's the message to send to get this kind of data back. Like you have to build all of that.
So the cost of Kingswaysoft
does that.
Saves you time.
Is better than spending the time. Okay.
Right. So like,
but you would have to build
I want accounts with these criteria, and it'll just be like, boom, here's your accounts, instead of you being like, here's the web service endpoint.
But you would have to build the code for the SSIS to pull the data out of another source.
Maybe. I mean, it depends on what the source is.
Okay.
Kingsway, if it's you're talking GP to, CRM, I'm putting that in air quotes for the people who are only listening, then Kingswaysoft talks to GP. So you could use them to talk to GP, and you didn't talk to something else, or you use some other adapter for whatever other system you're trying to pull data out of. But like,
got it. Okay. So it's not a full integration tool. It's I like that term, adapter.
Right. It's only an adapter that makes it easier to do Dynamics things in SSIS.
Is there anything we haven't covered yet? I mean, I feel like those are the big Scribe Scribe is, I wonder if we should like do some research and come back to even just talk about how Scribe went away. Like,
yeah,
I know.
We've been talking a lot about tools, but like we could also talk about things to prep or plan for, or think about like best practices just in general, like the tool set aside for like data migrations and integration.
I think that could be a whole nother conversation.
Follow-up.
Yeah, I think that's a good follow-up. Like, here's your options for tools to think about, but then what do you do once you
like all the planning are things that you just need to consider before starting one of these projects that has this as a component, which most of them do.
There's one other kind of like the next level of tool set that we haven't really talked about, which is the idea of like an enterprise service bus.
Which I know nothing about. So
if you have a very large, complex IT infrastructure with lots of applications, you're not going to do like point-to-point integrations as much, which is what you'd be doing with SSIS or Scribe, Timco, whatever. Like those are all more point-to-point. Enterprise service bus is more like, I have 20 different applications that all need to share data, different types of data with each other. And so one application will be, all right, well, this thing updated, I put it on the bus. And then the other applications are like, oh, I need that. Oh, I need that too. And they take it off the bus. It's how I think about enterprise service buses. I've never built one. That's beyond me too. But at a high level, that's kind of how they work.
So how is that different than like a data warehouse?
Well,
is that a dumb question?
Warehouse.
No, his face made me laugh.
I know. I'm I shouldn't have asked that. No, because you're talking about putting all the data in one spot and having it all go through the one spot instead of directly.
Right, but the warehouse, like the idea behind the warehouse is actually to warehouse it. Like I put the data in the warehouse, and
it's
that's
like the
where it
master
lives.
source of data,
Okay.
right?
Not necessarily like the master source, but like I'm taking data and I'm putting it there. I'm not using the data warehouse as
To
the
move data.
as the hub. Right?
I've
Like an
been
enterprise
on
service
projects
bus.
where we do use the data, like they do talk about using the data warehouse as the hub for the integrations, though.
Okay, well that's a little weird, and I think that's
So
a little
you're
weird.
saying that it's maybe
Or
not
maybe
best
it's not,
practice.
maybe it shouldn't, they shouldn't even be calling it a data warehouse.
Then I don't feel like it would be a data warehouse at all. Like at that point, it's more like a master data management system or something like that. But my understanding, and I might be totally off base, some solution architect who's listening might have very long and thought-provoking comments to leave on this episode, but a data warehouse is literally to warehouse data, like put it over there, and then I can do like reporting on it, or I can use it for disaster recovery or whatever I want to do, but like it's over there. An enterprise service bus is more like, I don't know, it's a more active kind of like, I'm trying to think of a good analogy because you know how I love a good analogy, but like things go onto the bus as it changes. So like applications you tell your various applications, like when these things happen, put a message on the bus saying that thing happened. And then other applications like subscribe to the kinds of messages that are relevant to them. So like if an account in Dynamics changes, then I put a message on the bus that says, Dynamics says this account changed. And any other application that cares about account changes will be like, I need that message. And so that they can all like take that account change off of the bus. So it's a lot more like interactive, like all of the applications just kind of like exchanging data as needed. But if like an opportunity changes and that drops onto the bus, like maybe only one other app cares about opportunity changes. And all these other applications are just like, don't care about that change, not relevant to me.
Mm-hmm.
So like that's the idea behind the service bus.
So what's the threshold of like when you would do just like to like a regular integration through Scribe, something like Scribe or Kingswaysoft to like moving to the bus? Like how many different applications need to be integrating together when that makes sense to actually go to the next level?
Well, standard consultant answer, it depends.
Of course.
It's going to come down to like overhead and management, like managing point-to-point integrations between 2 applications, easy. Between 3 applications, a little bit trickier. Between 4 or 5 applications, like especially if they're all sharing the same kind of data, like then you have to have logic in each integration process. It's like, well, if this change goes to this application, like if A changes something and it cascades to B, but A is also telling C, then I need to make sure that B doesn't tell C. But if it changes in B, then B needs to tell C and A, right? Like now it's getting complicated. Now you're like, wait, where did this change come from? Like, how do I keep track of which data changed where? That's the point where like, okay, at this point, I need to have something in the middle that A, B, and C are all talking to the middle, and then the middle is deciding who else needs to know. And then at that point, it might be something like a master data management system, or it might be an enterprise service bus, depending on what you want to do. Hopefully that answers the question.
I mean, it did, but it probably went a lot over my head. Anything else you guys have, like data tool? I know we're going to do a follow-up on like how to prep and best practices, but anything else you wanted to say about tools or options?
No. I still miss Scribe Workbench. That's my only last thought. I miss it.
You're really upset about that.
Look, it had a lot of problems, but I really loved it.
You know, Merlin gets on his soapbox about certain stuff, and it's been a while, I feel like, since Merlin did that. So
yeah. I haven't had a good
Scribe reminds me, so the first training I ever got with Tad in like pre-2013 was on Scribe at my first job. And so that just makes me think of Tad.
That's great.
Yeah.
Nice. All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining.
Bye. Thank you for listening to the Dynamics Hot Dish podcast. For additional content and previous episodes, check out our website at dynamicshotdish.com, follow us on Twitter at dynamicshotdish, and subscribe to our podcast for notifications. Thanks. See you next time.